Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE, GMAT, and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your GRE exam. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner, and essay grader and full-length practice exam. You can try it out for free by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Linda Abraham from Accepted on the show, and Linda, really happy to have you back.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so do you mind introducing yourself just for people who haven't heard you before?
Sure. Well, as you said, Tyler, my name is Linda Abraham. I am the founder of Accepted, a premier admissions consultancy for undergraduate and graduate students. We work with students, again, applying to college, university, as well as MBA programs, medical school, law school, a host of graduate specialties, psychology, math, all the sciences, you name it. We have specialists on staff who can work with applicants.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think you said that you had a resource that you wanted to share with our audience as well.
Oh, thank you. Yes, this is for graduate school applicants. It's called Fitting In and Standing Out. There's a paradox at the heart of admissions. You have to fit in with the program, and you have to stand out in the applicant pool. Fitting in and standing out tells applicants exactly how to do that, and they can download it for free at accepted.com/FISO, which is for fitting in, standing out.
Great. Well, thank you. And so today we're going to be talking about one of the more interesting trends in the admissions world, and you're a great person to talk to about this because you span both undergraduate and graduate admissions. But in undergraduate admissions, the sort of test optional policies that really dominated sort of the landscape after COVID have started to get reversed and seem to be in retreat, right? You've got Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth. I think MIT was the first. I think even like Caltech has gone from being test blind to now going back to testing. Just a lot of, and Stanford now is requiring testing again. So these like prestigious and prominent schools are requiring testing again when they were test optional for a while. And none of them have talked about why, other than sort of their overarching sort of thesis, which I do agree with, which is that test scores actually improve equity or are one of the best ways for equity to shine through in a world where everything in the admissions process can be improved with money, including testing, but also everything else, right? So with all that, I'm curious what you think about graduate school admissions. We haven't seen the same reversal yet for graduate school programs looking for people to take the GRE again, for instance. And I'm curious sort of what you think about that, whether you think it's coming or not coming, and why.
All right. So I think, first of all, when you talk about undergraduate or college, you're talking, there are obviously differences, but it's really one degree that people are applying for. It's a bachelor's of arts, a bachelor's of science, occasionally a bachelor's of business, but it's still always a bachelor's degree. When you talk about grad, you're talking about an MD, an MBA, a JD, PhD, MSW, a host of different degree programs. And the difference is you have still a lot of distinctiveness, but more uniformity in terms of the GPA. Still a lot of differences. I don't want to minimize them, but less than you have from high schools.
Right.
And you also have many different ways frequently to assess academic ability.
Right.
Okay. So sometimes somebody could come in with a lot of work experience to a graduate program. And it could be very demanding work experience, maybe demanding either qualitative analysis or quantitative analysis, whatever the school's looking for, or perhaps a lot of patient contact if somebody's applying to a clinical program, either in a paid capacity or a volunteer capacity, or maybe a lot of research experience of applying to PhD programs. So, along with an undergraduate transcript, which could come from a fairly demanding undergraduate program.
Mm-hmm.
So admissions committees are dealing with more sources of information in graduate school than they typically get from undergraduate school.
Right. Well, and I think also, like you pointed out, and like I think you hinted at this, but just to call it out explicitly,
Sure.
grade inflation in high school is such a big problem now that I think it's something like 40% of students have an A average, or 47, I think, have an A average.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
how do you
A
tell?
4 point something average, right?
Yeah, exactly, a 4.3. How do you differentiate, right? And everybody kind of has the same extracurriculars to an extent. Obviously, if you do something really special, then that's going to help you stand out. But in graduate school, you do have a much larger body of work on your resume for them to evaluate. So that does make sense.
Right. Some programs also interview, which I think is fairly uncommon on the undergraduate level.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So many programs do actually. So that's a big factor. Now, grade inflation is also a big factor on the graduate level, but there are still more sources of information, more ways for them to assess academic ability.
Hmm.
And I think that does give at least some programs the option to go either test optional or no test at all. Most graduate programs are not going the undergraduate route that I know of, saying we're not going to consider a test at all.
Hmm.
You can't give us a test score. We don't want the information,
Hmm.
which some schools, undergraduate schools, have gone. There are more, and again, you can't talk about it monolithically in terms of graduate school. I don't see med schools giving up the MCAT.
Yes, yeah.
I would be really surprised if that happened. There are many business schools that are giving lots and lots of options in terms of testing, either different tests, test waiver options. Michigan Ross has its statement of academic ability, which that you can submit in place of a test score if you think that your academic abilities well shown via your grades, your transcript, and work experience. I actually just interviewed yesterday the head of admissions for George Washington Law, Dean Sophia Sim, and she said that they just got a variance for a select group of students where they won't have to submit any test score, which
Hmm.
for law school I think is a first.
Yeah.
Yes, law schools have been accepting the GRE. They've been some have a variance for JD Next, but otherwise, it's been like the LSAT rules. So that I think is a first. So there is experimentation going on in the different types of graduate programs, um, and they look at more different things. So there's going to be I think a little bit more flexibility depending upon the specific program one is applying to.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that also, like, it's very much gotten to the point now where I think consumers, like students or the applicants, you know, the probably the most onerous part of the application process is the testing, right? Because you have to do a lot of preparation. It's
It
stressful.
depends on how good a test taker you are, but
Right, right, exactly. Maybe some people enjoy it. But
right.
yeah, I think that like for a lot of people on the customer side, quote unquote, on the applicant side,
Yeah.
if they can avoid it, they will, right? If you
Oh
say, "Oh
yeah.
yeah, don't do it," then they're gonna take that and run with it. So it
I
really
mean,
is kind of
we
up
have
to the
clients who
universities.
tell us I only want to apply to programs, depending on again the type of degree, that do not require a test. That's the first thing they'll tell us. So in terms
Oh
of the
wow.
onerous of the test, I mean, it's not the weather, it's not the placement. It's I don't want to take the test.
Hmm. Why do you think that is though? I mean, at least for me, like I always thought that these tests were an opportunity to kind of like prove my mettle, but maybe I'm weird.
Well, obviously they have not done well on testing, on the standardized tests in the past. I
Right.
mean, some people just have a real knack for this thing. I have my sister, and this was decades ago. She used to get perfect scores.
Hmm.
It wasn't that we had similar grades. She's definitely a bright person. We had similar grades, very similar grades, but I don't remember my test scores anymore, but they were good test scores. They weren't outstanding. She got perfect scores.
Some
So
people are just
for
good at
her,
it
sure,
then,
she'd say,
yeah.
yeah, she was just her mind worked that way. Again, she was an excellent student. Um, that's just how her mind worked.
Hmm.
Mine didn't.
Well,
So, and that's going to be true for others.
right. Yeah. And so I mean again, we just mentioned, right? Like I think from the customer side, if you can avoid doing 3 months of work on top of your existing job or whatever, or like your existing school if you're applying straight after your senior year, you'd rather do that, right? Like you'd rather do less work, just all other things equal. So it really is kind of up to the administrators, right? And it sounds like what you're saying, at least, is that the administrators right now don't feel like they need the additional information. Is that like kind of roughly how you'd characterize it, or?
Yeah, I think in some cases they don't. Again, and I don't see medical schools giving up the MCAT. They want
Yeah.
that information. All right.
Hmm.
The ABA, except for this one variance that I heard about yesterday, feels that schools need some testing information. And if somebody applies with both the GRE and the LSAT, the ABA wants the LSAT score. So, it's the ABA is going to have to change its perspective before law schools really change.
Hmm.
Um, and then MBA schools, there's a lot more flexibility. Different other graduate programs, it's all over the map in terms of testing.
Hmm.
But I think you're right. There is more information out there. They have other ways of evaluating applicants that they feel are effective. Um, and some schools, some graduate programs have said no test. I would also say that while most of those saying no test, or you can submit or request a test waiver or whatever the statement that Ross has, they're doing so because they feel they have other ways of effectively evaluating applicants' potential and future performance, which is the point of the test, to
Hmm.
predict future performance. Some of them are also probably doing it because it does increase application volume.
Hmm.
Taking a test is a cost,
Right.
right? The time involved, the test prep involved, the the cost of a course, that's all a cost to the applicant. So the school is essentially reducing the applicant's costs to apply and not reducing its revenue, increasing its revenue potentially by saying no test.
Yeah, well, and it's also, I mean, what I've heard from friends of mine who work in that field is that also there's like internal incentives too, right? Like maybe their bonuses are tied to how many people apply each year. Maybe it's a performance metric for, the admissions team.
Sure.
So if you can basically make a one-time decision, a decision that a lot of people like, and get 20% more applicants, which really helps your numbers, right? It's
Right.
easy to do, and it's also hard to reverse.
Well, as we see on the undergraduate level, they're reversing it.
Well,
But
right. And they're reversing it because they had a
yeah,
real good reason to, right? And so that's kind of
right, right.
that's the threshold, right? Because I mean, when we were looking at the undergrad admissions and test optional, nobody released their data except the University of Texas. I think it was UT Austin. But when University of Texas released their data, they found that students that they admitted test optional had an average SAT of 1150 versus the overall average of like 1400. And they got their average freshman year GPA was 0.86 points lower than everybody else, which is a massive amount. It's basically a whole grade. So
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was part of
it's
their
huge.
justification for it. I wonder if graduate schools experience the same issue with their test optional admits, or if, they just don't mind as much, or if the other factors like we talked about are offsetting, the potential that you might be admitting somebody that's not qualified.
They definitely don't want to admit somebody who's going to flunk out,
Yeah.
right? They're
That's
going
bad.
to
That's bad for
totally
everybody.
struggle. That's bad for them. They don't want that. I think they're also. I think there's a lot of factors going on here. I mean, I think most admissions professionals working for schools are dedicated. They don't want to torture or torment applicants for no good reason.
For sure.
So, in addition to the reasons that you just provided about increasing their numbers and looking good to their employers, I think there is a very genuine concern for the applicants. Why put them through it if there's no benefit to it? I think again, the ones doing the most experimentation right now that I know of or are following are the MBA programs, and
Hmm.
they are definitely closely watching the performance of those people who are admitted test optional.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know the details. I haven't seen any numbers, but they're definitely looking at that. They're not just going blindly at it. And
Right.
obviously, with COVID, they had data initially to see how it happened. In terms of, I remember reading, and I can't remember now if it was MIT or Dartmouth, one of the schools that reinstated a testing requirement said that they felt, and you alluded to this earlier in our conversation, that they could actually admit more, they could increase diversity more effectively by having that information, by having the test score information,
Right.
because they didn't have to rely entirely on the grades. Um, I think on the graduate level, and I can't, this is just a gut feeling of mine. I think that not requiring testing or having test optionality allows the admissions directors to make decisions without worrying about their average test score taking a hit because they admit somebody with a low average test score.
Hmm.
Um, and that makes the average test score, and again, I'm going to refer to MBA programs in particular, as something that prospective students look at, alumni like to brag about, recruiters look at in terms of, the quality of the students.
Right.
So I think there's that factor also. Um, Lately, I think admissions directors talk about it in a little less direct way in terms of quality of students. But if I had $100 for every time I heard an admissions director say the quality of our students was in the incoming class is outstanding, the GMAT score went up X points, I'd be a lot richer today. Let's put it that way.
Because
Now,
that's
again, I
what
hear that less in the
people.
last few years.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a number. People like numbers. There's a concreteness to numbers.
Right.
Um, when I started doing this, a 700 score was a very high score
Right.
in terms of the old GMAT. Now it's 730. That's a big difference.
Yeah, especially percentiles wise too. Well, it's
Yeah,
interesting. You
740.
mentioned like MBA admissions programs or like graduate admissions programs that they will be able to admit people that they otherwise would have had a harder time admitting because they have lower test scores. And that is more or less the core argument for test optional when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? But the
Right,
interesting
right.
part, or at least the part that I found very interesting about like Dartmouth's announcement and Yale's announcement, was they were very focused on how test scores improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because if you've got two people with a 4.0, because everyone has a 4.0, and one of them went to, a school in a quote unquote like bad area, right? Like, do you just take them on the hope that it
Disadvantage.
works, or do you want some assurance? And then the test scores provide that, or the other thing is the test scores kind of surface diamonds in the rough in these areas. And so I'm curious if you feel like that logic still applies to the graduate level, or if it's less so because at that point, like you've gone to undergrad and you've maybe had a job or two at this point.
I think for medical school, it's certainly true. And again, that's the one area where I'm pretty confident in most of the healthcare programs.
Hmm.
Um, I think I don't see them giving up the test score, and diversity has been increasing in medical schools. So I think that argument would hold there.
Okay.
In MBA programs where you have people coming from many different backgrounds and having different ways of showing academic ability, again, there I see test optionality probably staying,
Hmm.
or perhaps with waivers where the school feels that the applicant has provided enough evidence that they don't need a test, or you can say, no, you need to take a test. I need to see how you do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then
And
that.
I,
Oh,
I
go
think
ahead.
I think the one thing we haven't touched on
Hmm.
is that the test can be a really good thing for an applicant.
Right.
We've been talking it all from the school's perspective. and how most applicants, understandably, really want to avoid that test.
Right.
But the test can be, especially if somebody had a weak GPA or some academic challenges in undergraduate school, having a nice, shiny, high test score can do wonders, not only for your chances of admission, but for your chances of snagging a scholarship.
Right. Right. That makes a lot of sense. And also, I mean, that was going to be kind of where I went next with it too, is like when should people go for these tests anyway? Like I think what we've established in this conversation is neither of us are expecting that test optional for graduate school is going to change dramatically. Probably it'll be much less dramatic than undergrad and maybe forever, right? Like test optional might be in grad school forever. So then it's like, well, now that it's optional, that still means that some people should do it, right? So
That's
who
right.
are those people, right? And why? And you touched on one of them, right? If you have, for instance, like my undergrad GPA wasn't that great. I think I had like a 3.0, right? So if I wanted to go to HBS, I would need to show up with like a
You need to do
750.
it a lot.
Yeah, I need to show up with like a 750 and have a really good resume otherwise.
That's right.
But that's an example of where if I applied with no test score, it would be a flat no.
Right. I think the other category of applicant who should take the test would be, frankly, somebody like my sister,
Hmm.
somebody who's traditionally done well on the test, maybe with a little bit of prep or no prep, um, and they do really well. They
Yeah,
shine. Well, if you can present another piece of evidence that you're going to shine academically, why not?
yeah, yeah. Why
Why
not?
not?
Yeah. So I think
So it might increase your chances of getting a scholarship.
yeah.
It
No, that's
might
a very good
get
point. I think the
you know
scholarship
uh,
angle might be the angle that does motivate people to get back into testing the most, right? I think there's been a big push. I mean, it's overdue with how expensive college and graduate school have got. But there's been a big push towards like as a part of your application process, making scholarships like a key piece of it.
right. I can remember talking with one admissions director who said, we post a tuition on our website, but nobody really knows what tuition is until they're accepted, and they see if and what they get in terms of a scholarship offer.
Hmm.
So,
And for better or
yeah,
for
you can
worse, oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
for better or for worse.
Well, yeah, because the thing that's a little frustrating, right? And I mean, like Villanova and undergrad's the best example of this, but basically, there are some like schools kind of the thing that was surprising to learn for me was that something like 30 to 40% of all college students get some scholarship money, right? There's just a ton of, if you're paying full price, that is like, a subset of their whole student body. And they are expecting that the blended amount, like the blended price for everybody, is going to be quite a bit lower than that because a lot of people are going to be getting scholarship money instead. Right. So it's almost
Right.
like when you pay for healthcare without insurance, right? Where it's like,
Right.
you get you're paying a rate that nobody ever expected you to pay just because like that's the default that they set just to anchor the price really high and then they like discount it by 90%. American healthcare system is great, but also like I feel like colleges are moving a little bit into that model where it's like they anchor at the really crazy high price, but then like they're kind of expecting or hoping that you're going to find ways to get assistance with that. So test scores are a big piece of that.
Right. Right. I think I once I was talking with Sujin Kwon Ko, who's the former dean of admissions at Michigan Ross, and she very wisely said, think of it like a diagram, a 2 by 2 diagram. In the upper right, you have people who are academically gifted and good at testing.
Mhm.
And then move over to the left, they're a little bit less, their GPA isn't not so high, okay? But they're still good at testing. Well, that second group should really take the test.
Yeah.
Okay? They really need to take the test. The first group, it's probably a good idea. Why not, right? Below that, you'll have people who are not good at testing and didn't have a good GPA. Well, if they can do the test prep and get that test score up, it's really going to enhance their chances of admission. So it
Hmm.
probably pays to really, really invest time in a course and tutoring or whatever to show that you can handle the work. And then over here would be people who are good test takers. I mean, am I getting a little confused? No, they
They're
I
good
think I'm getting
academics,
confused.
bad testing. Yeah,
Right,
was the last group.
exactly. And then, it's like, okay, no, I think it's good test takers. Oh, we did that one. Whatever, you get the idea. There's a, there's four groupings. One should definitely take the test. Why not? One should definitely take the test because they really need the help. One shouldn't take the test because it's they're not going to do well, and that's it. It's the good grades, bad test takers. That was the last group.
Hmm.
They probably should go for a waiver because
Hmm.
they've provided evidence of academic ability, and they'd have to put in either a ton of work or they wouldn't do well, and it could actually take away from the assessment, right? And then you have the last group that we were mentioning a minute ago.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
that's
I
how
think.
it breaks down, but it really can help them.
Mhm. Yeah, it really can help us, and I think especially for scholarship, it can be an opportunity, right? So it just depends on your own personal
It makes
preferences and your own resume.
right, and I mean, schools like to give scholarships. Yes, they do give it to deserving people, but they also like to give scholarships to people who are going to make them look good.
Right.
People with high test scores, when they post that class profile, it makes them look good.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Anything else that you want to cover on this episode before we wrap up?
I think in terms of testing and test optionality, that's really what I wanted to say. That even whatever the schools decide, the
Hmm.
applicant really has to decide what's good for them, right? Do they want to say no? I don't want to apply anywhere where there's a test required. That's one option. But if you want to apply, I don't think that should be the main criterion in terms of what you choose or how you choose your programs. What should be your primary criterion is where do you want to be after you finish the degree, and then you choose the schools.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks with Tyler from Achievable and Linda Abraham from Accepted. And Linda, do you mind just sharing that link one more time of the free resource that you have?
I'd be happy to. Thank you. It's accepted.com/FISO, and that's for fitting in and standing out because that's what every graduate applicant has to do when they apply. Again, the URL is accepted.com/F as in fitting in, standing out, FISO.
Great. Thank you so much.